Hey everyone, Dr. Nicole here. I am going to be doing a Q&A tonight in reference to the first video that we launched from our 6-part series. I apologize about this pale winter skin of mine, but the lighting's not really helping me today. So we had quite a few questions that were submitted, but for those of you who have not seen the video, feel free to listen in and definitely learn from the questions that were already asked, but just look into the comments, because one of the first comments that will be there will actually be the link to the video, so you can definitely listen to that at a later time in order to just kind of get the general overview of pathogens and some of the things that we'll be talking about tonight. So just to recap the video quickly, is primarily what the premise of the talk was introducing this idea that there are different types of pathogens that exist right now that are actually classified as stealth pathogens. And really what that means is they're different infections that have evolved quite a bit over time, and they've primarily evolved just because of changes in our environment, but also because of a lot of resistance that's happening due to antibiotics being in a lot of the food that we're consuming, as well as even just harsh cleaners that we're using to wash our hands, hand sanitizers, bleach, etc. So some of these bacteria that maybe we were exposed to a couple of years ago, even strep as an example, that our body would have been able to fight off. Now what we're finding is that in some of our patients that we work with chronic illness or chronic symptoms like fatigue, headaches, migraines, joint pain, that sometimes these infections are there's Pappy. There he is. He wants to sit on my lap. So what we're finding, okay, you can come up. So what we're finding is that some of these infections are actually still in the body and lurking in some of the tissues. We do find strep in actually many people's tonsils and even thyroid, that they're not necessarily coming in because they have strep throat, but they might be dealing with chronic respiratory issues or even chronic sinus issues. So at the end of the day, it's all connected, but there's also a lot of infections that we can hold on to long term. So that's really the premise of the whole video, but definitely we go way more into depth about bacteria versus parasites, and even talking about mold exposure that many of us have but don't realize. And a lot of us have the mold exposure actually because a lot of mold is in our food. So for those of you or people that you know that have allergies to peanuts, peanut butter, or even having allergies to certain types of fruits, especially fruits with skins like apples and plums and peaches, sometimes you're actually not having a reaction to the fruit or the peanut, you're actually having a reaction to the mold that's on it, because those that category of both peanuts, peanut butter, as well as fruits with skins actually are high mold foods. So it's quite interesting when you find that that is the root cause. So one of the things that we talked about in the video was in relation to mold and how it's becoming more problematic because of all of the wireless technology that we have. And one of the questions that came up was, what is a list of the full, or a full list of EMFs that could be causing this problem, or even creating just irritation in our bodies in general? And EMFs, just first of all to clarify, stands for electromagnetic frequencies. And this really just has to do with Wi-Fi, routers, even cordless landline phones, cell phones. He really wants to be part of this video. Buddy, you gotta go. And then also, in addition to that, is anything Bluetooth, anything wireless. So Alexa, which links us all up to Amazon, collects our grocery lists, and even just Sonos speakers and other types of Bluetooth speakers. These are all different things in that category of devices that will give off these EMFs. And just to reiterate what we talked about in the video is that EMFs will actually cause mold to multiply by 600% per week. So that becomes problematic if you have been exposed to significant amounts of molds and they are still hanging out in the tissues of the body. The most typical thing that we see is that mold is hanging out in the lymph nodes and also the sinuses. And it does take quite a bit of effort to get it out of the body, which is one of the reasons why we decided to bring in an infrared sauna as well as ionized foot baths in our practice, because it just speeds up the process to get these things out of the lymph nodes. So one of the other questions that came up, there was actually quite a few questions that came up around pregnant women and pregnancy. And I thought this was really important to address, just because there are, one of the things that we talked about is how a lot of toxins can be passed from mom to baby. And technically the firstborn will actually get 80% of mom's heavy metals. And with that being said, the big question was, well, what can we do as a precaution, if we are pregnant or we are nursing, and how can we prevent that from happening? And you actually can. So one of the primary things that are extremely safe for women that are both pregnant as well as breastfeeding is something called chlorella. And chlorella is really just a source of chlorophyll, which comes from plants. It's obviously going to be more potent. And this is something that is amazing at cleansing the blood, cleansing the tissues, and cleansing the breast milk as well. So this can be utilized in order to prevent some of that transfer of the heavy metals and other types of toxins as well. It's really not about heavy metals. It's also the pesticides and the herbicides and the chemicals we get from plastics and the chemicals that we get from getting our hair done and our nails done and all of those things as well. So it's really helping you to cleanse all the tissues and prevent that transfer from happening. I know we had another question on here in relation to pregnancy. Let me take a peek at the list here. No, I think we covered it. So another one that I thought was really important was if you're not eating organic every day and you're eating out quite often, but not necessarily taking antibiotics, how long would you say someone can go undetected until they feel symptoms from ingesting the antibiotics? And it's not the easiest question, but I did want to obviously address it. You're not always going to feel symptoms of the antibiotics. What you're primarily going to experience is possible gut disruption. And it's really not just about the antibiotics. It also has a lot to do with pesticides and herbicides. One of the most common pesticides that we're getting exposed to is glyphosate. And glyphosate is also the main active ingredient that is in Roundup. So Roundup is what you kill your weeds with. So the collaboration of the antibiotic exposure as well as these different pesticides will actually create quite a bit of irritation in the gut lining. So this can start in the stomach, which would be indicated or correlated to indigestion, heartburn, burping. And then as it maybe gets into the other parts of the intestines, Pappy, then you're maybe going to experience some bloating, gas, which then eventually leads to leaky gut. He is persistent today. There he is. Say hi, buddy. So when it comes to the antibiotics, the biggest concern is the depletion of the good flora of the gut. So when you're dealing with the good flora of the gut, we call it probiotics. So when you take antibiotics or you consume them through your food, you are potentially going to have a depletion of the good flora, which then makes us more susceptible to the bad bacteria. And one thing to really understand, which I think is super important, is that we're always exposed to bacteria. Every time we eat something, it's going to have some level of bacteria on it. So that's where those probiotics come in and how important they are, is because that's going to protect us and pretty much crowd out the bad bacteria. So getting on a good probiotic is definitely essential. If you do get on a probiotic and it creates loose bowel movements, you might be dealing with a parasite issue. And that was another thing that we did talk about in the video, is this issue with parasites. And parasites are one of those things that Most people are kind of baffled, like, how would I ever get exposure to that? And it's really has a lot to do with just the changes that have happened in the farming industry. And a lot of these animals that are, part of our food chain or food supply, they are the ones that have the parasites initially. And as we consume them, we will then get exposure. And the next question after I say this to patients is, well, wouldn't you kill that off if you cook it? And yes, to some, but there are certain parasites that actually can withstand up to 600 degrees Fahrenheit. And please don't cook your food above that because it will disintegrate essentially. So that is definitely something to take into consideration, again, with the probiotics, and if there is a significant change in the bowel movements. So some of the other questions that came up also, going back to the conversation about mold, is mold always visible? And I thought this was a really important question, because when I ask about, have you had any known mold exposure, almost 100% of the time the answer is no. And as I start to ask more questions, that's when we start to allude to, maybe. And the reason why I do this is because mold, again, it can really affect your gastrointestinal system, but can also affect your lymph nodes, which are your drainage mechanisms. And drainage is really so important. And the way I explain this to some of our patients is that if you're vacuuming and your vacuum becomes clogged, then pretty much you have to stop vacuuming, because it's pointless at this point, because the vacuum or the filter is clogged and you're not going to be successful with continuing to vacuum. We have to kind of take that same concept to our bodies, and our tonsils, our spleen, which is on the left side of your abdomen, and your liver are 3 of your main filters. So over time, the more exposure that we get to heavy metals like silver fillings in your teeth, or the more exposure we have to these pesticides, these herbicides, as well as even the antibiotics and other medications, then we are going to have congestion in these organs. So if we start to develop congestion in these organs, then we are going to not feel great. And one of the biggest components of this chronic fatigue that so many of us are struggling with is stagnant lymph. And what I mean by that is your lymph nodes are clogged, your filters are clogged. So if you are fatigued and you're not getting relief by maybe taking supplements or taking B vitamins, then you might be actually dealing with a congestion issue. And that's where, utilizing some different strategic detox mechanisms is really, really important to get all of that moving, get it flushed out, and then really get your brain the nutrients and the oxygen that it needs for you to sustain your energy. So I totally derailed, but my question that I had was, would mold always be visible? And the answer is no. The most common things that I hear are going to be, or the most common things that the woman that we work with, who's our mold inspector, that she tells us is that it's stemming from the bathroom that is the ensuite for the master bedroom, so the bathroom connected, or it's coming from a basement where there is forced hot air, and the forced hot air is bringing the mold spores up to the other parts of the home. So again, it's not always going to be visible. Most of the time it could be in your air ducts, and it could be in a crawl space or even a basement, and that is being brought up through the ventilation system of your home. So mold is tricky, but if you are someone who has a household of a lot of people that are dealing with allergies, respiratory issues, sinus issues, chronic tonsil issues, or most of your family members have had their tonsils removed, you want to start thinking about if there is mold in your house. So some of the other questions kind of coming more from a therapeutic standpoint, one of them was, do natural antibiotics exist? And I thought this was a really important question, because the answer is yes and no. And there are different types of supplements and herbs that exist out there that are really helpful for you to clear out different infections, including bacterial infections. Some of them include like oil of oregano, berberine, grapefruit seed extract. Those are some of the top known ones to help you to fight these infections. But really at the end of the day, you really need to have liver support in the mix. And to get really technical, these are called NRF2 accelerators. And that is kind of a whole array of different types of herbs that really actually benefit your liver when you really look at the constituents of these different herbs. But it's really important to understand that the body is complex and it's usually needs a couple avenues of support. And I wish that there was like that one product that was the end all be all and you could take that and eradicate all of your infections and call it a day. But you really have to make sure that your drainage mechanisms are working, number one. You have to make sure that your liver is supported. You have to make sure your gut is supported. And then you can utilize these, so-called natural antimicrobials to help you get rid of these infections. But if you're stirring things up and your drainage and detox mechanisms don't work, you will sometimes get yourself into trouble. And I know many of our patients, they reference the term herx. And herx is when you have a negative reaction, but it's kind of an assumed reaction because you're either starting a detox or you're starting a protocol. But sometimes the herx is telling you that your body needs either different support or more support. So it's something to always be in touch with your body. And if you don't feel well from something that you're doing, then you might need to change what you're doing. Okay, so let me go back to these questions and see if there was anything else that came up. Another really good question was, how does your immune system distinguish between the bacteria that normally inhabits your gut without causing disease and the bacteria from pathogens? So your body and your immune system is extremely, extremely intelligent, and it definitely has the capabilities to know what is foreign to the body. And it will definitely have the capabilities to acknowledge it, but also then to send in a fleet in order to start the process of getting rid of these infections. Unfortunately, sometimes when your body is going through this process of targeting these infections, you don't feel the best because it's your immune system working really, really hard. It's not a bad thing. So when you do get, quote unquote sick, and if you are having maybe, a fever or your tonsils are swollen or, you're just feeling like you're coming down with something, sometimes it is good to try to let your body ride it out for a short period of time to see if your own defenses can fight it off. Because if your own defenses do fight it off without any type of medical intervention, that actually is really fantastic for creating a memory of that pathogen. And then if you were exposed to it, say a week later because, your friend who gave it to you originally still has it, then you actually will not necessarily be at risk for getting reinfected because you've created an immunity. So definitely it's sometimes good to let your body ride it out a little bit and see if it can get over it on its own without always running for the intervention. So it definitely really helps to try that route first. Obviously, if you're running extremely high fever, then make sure that you are speaking with a medical professional at that point. So one of the questions I wanted to end with, because I know people always love to have some tools that they can start with right away, and two things that were asked was, one was, what are some of the best cleaners? Because one of the things I talked about in the video was discussing, how we really want to stay away from some of these really harsh cleaners so that we're not creating these super bugs essentially in our house. And one of the things that I recommend is keep it simple. Keep it as simple as possible. You'd be amazed as vinegar and water and how well that can be a cleaner in your home and used on your countertops. It's safe for granite and wood and everything else, but it does work wonders on, cleaning those surfaces as well. And then in addition, one of the things that I recommend highly for your body, your face, as well as even using it as a detergent with your clothes is actually Castile soap. Some of you may have heard of Dr. Bronner's. It's a pretty well-known brand, but Castile is a fantastic option. It's been around forever. And I feel like a lot of people got away from using it, but Dr. Bronner's is the most common brand you can find in many stores, and that is a great way to go to keep it simple and to really cleanse your skin, but also not not strip it of all of its beneficial bacteria, which is huge. You have tons of bacteria on your skin, and it is very important to maintain the healthy bacteria. So even sometimes when people are dealing with acne and they are taking an antibiotic for that, I'll actually recommend taking a probiotic, mixing it up. You can use an infant probiotic because they dissolve in water better. And if you mix that up and actually spray it on your face before bed, that really helps to replenish that good flora, which can really help the skin as well. And then the other question was, what are some of the methods of detox for best ridding, toxicity, pathogens, heavy metals? And obviously when we work with patients, we get very strategic on case by case because everyone's so different. But just generally, if you're looking to, just jumpstart the process and do something, basic, but something effective, is heat your body up. So number one is infrared sauna is so fantastic for that. Sweat, go run, jump on a trampoline, go do something that is going to get your blood pumping, get your lymph moving. All those lymph nodes need to move as well, and sweat. If you're a person who doesn't sweat, by the way, your lymph is clogged. Your lymph nodes are clogged, and that means that you are most likely tired, you're most likely not digesting your food very well, and you're most likely dealing with an inflammatory cascade in your body. So sweating is important, so you really need to make sure that you're sweating. We have many people that start with us that they get in our sauna and they have to sit in there for almost an hour and a half because it took them 45 minutes before they started sweating. And it's just something that you need to do to jumpstart the process. So I mentioned the trampoline. There are things called rebounders. They're like the mini trampolines, so they're very nice, so you could just store them in a corner. But jumping on that about 10 minutes a day is huge for getting everything moving. And then when it comes to like a supplement or an herbal perspective, I mentioned chlorella earlier, which is very safe and effective for women who are pregnant or nursing. Chlorella can be used by anyone. You don't have to be pregnant or nursing. But chlorella and other types of binders called zeolite is also another really fantastic option to start binding up some of these toxins and getting them out of the body. It's very supportive to all pathogens, molds, toxicity, etc. So you really can hit a lot of birds with one stone, essentially, when you're utilizing the zeolite or even chlorella. There are a lot of different types of chlorella, so don't get yourself too overwhelmed. Just trying to keep it simple with chlorella vulgaris is a really, really good option. Also, don't go cheap on chlorella. Please don't do that because chlorella can have toxicity. Go figure. So you have to think about it is if chlorella has the potency to detox you and flush out toxins and bind up toxins in your own body, depending on where it's grown or what it was sprayed with, then it would also absorb all of that. So you really want to make sure that you're getting it from a really high quality source. We often recommend BioPure. They are a fantastic company and they source it from a really great place, and it is very clean, very effective. And then the other thing I mentioned earlier too is outside of the sauna, ionized foot baths. I know that there are other types of foot baths out there that exist, like clay foot baths, and those are perfectly fine as well. The ionized foot baths, they work a little bit more systemically through the body, meaning they work on kind of all the tissue, but those are very, very effective at getting heavy metals moving, getting toxins moving, and just helping to drain them out of the body effectively. So there's quite a few ways that you can go to jumpstart the process. And if you're ever looking for more of a doctor-run type of cleanse so that you make sure that you can avoid, feeling not the best, is we do a 21-day cleanse 2 times a year here at IWG. They actually just kicked it off on the 5th, so you may have just missed this one, but we will definitely be doing more in the future. But it's a whole food type of cleanse, and they do a really nice job our staff does a really nice job of making sure that you have lots of recipes and lots of tools at your fingertips to keep it as smooth as possible when you're going through the cleanse. So that is all the questions that I have right now. So obviously, if you are just coming in now or you missed most of this call, please feel free to write some comments, and we will definitely do our best to get back to you within the next 24 to 48 hours. And again, we did list the link to the video about pathogens, so please check that out too. It will go more in depth than I did tonight, but I appreciate all of you that submitted your questions ahead of time, and we hope that this was really good information and it can really empower you to take those next steps. All right, I'll talk to you soon.